Why are we really here? It's not just about the science and the tech and the exponentials and cool apps and 3D printing of organs. It all comes down to the individual, the patient, and we're all going to be patients in some form or another at some point. So part of the theme, as I've sort of crafted the last few days coming up, is to include patients and their stories and their learnings and their needs, so we can all help, find those grand challenges that we have both individually and across the spectrum. So I'm really pleased to bring my friend Brett Bullington to the stage with his wife Diana. Brett I got to know several years ago. He's a key figure in Palo Alto, where I live, a former executive at Excite, angel investor, a mentor to many across the whole technology spectrum. And Brett, as we'll hear, has had a pretty interesting couple of years and is really here to share us a bit of the patient story and that of his family and that of all of society coming to help lift him up and take it forward. So that, I'm going to let his wife Diana help tell part of the story and drive, and we'll take it from there.
Great.
And since you have a husband and wife team, we might disagree every once in a while. So if we disagree, you have to be patient with us.
Okay. You're going to start telling the story, huh?
So about 8 years ago, I actually had a little heart problem where I ended up at Stanford and had a doctor, one of the best names ever, Dr. Fearon. What a great name for a doctor. And he ended up putting 3 stents in me. And in part of that, he said, Brett, I want you to exercise better, get in better shape. So I started exercising more. And one of the things I really started doing was I started taking these spinning classes religiously. And I took lots of spinning classes to the point where I was doing so much of it, I decided I wanted to get a road bike. So I got a road bike. And then I got a road bike and I started riding 60 to 70 mile rides. And I got to the point where I decided I wanted to do a bigger ride. So what I decided to do is sign up for a big ride, to ride from Santa Barbara, California, to Charleston, South Carolina, and which is actually a big step from riding 60 miles from Palo Alto to the coast and back. And so I did it, and this is the ride I went on, and there was 23 other people on the trip. And so what happened was, I rode all the way across California, across Arizona, across New Mexico, and I almost got across Oklahoma. And going across Oklahoma, I had a crash. And somehow I was in this remote area. I don't remember anything about the crash, so if anyone asks me questions about the crash, I know nothing about the crash. But I fell. I was going down a gradual hill. I was going like 18 to 20 miles an hour on my bike, and somehow I lost my balance and fell off the front left part of the bike and landed on my head. And fortunately, on the ride were 2 doctors. One was a doctor from Stanford, one was a doctor from England. And they triaged me until the ambulance came. Then the ambulance came and picked me up and took me to a helicopter and flew me from Oklahoma to Joplin, Missouri. And Joplin, Missouri is where I was there. I was in a coma and everything for 8 days. But they took...
I'll talk a little bit now.
She knows more about that.
So this is a picture that Brett took the day before he had his accident. That was October 7th, 2012. And this was taken October 9th, 2012. I heard about his accident. Sorry, it's emotional. I jumped on a plane. I got to Joplin, Missouri, and that is the way we found Brett. So he arrived with a Glasgow Coma Scale of 6 to 7. Pretty bad news. He had a subdural hematoma on the right side of his head. Emergency surgery was done. He had a craniectomy to allow for swelling. And so I arrived at the hospital the next day. My son came, and a good friend. Sorry, I'm almost done.
It's actually our son, just so you just know.
Right. Our son. So anyway, we arrived there, and right away we were like, okay, phone calls are coming in. We need to figure out how we're going to communicate with everyone. So we started a blog. We called it Brett's Recovery, a very optimistic name for our blog, which we were super happy about. And so there were some articles written about Brett
Right.
and the accident. And this is our blog. It's still available if anybody wants to go and look. It was a long first few months dealing with his recovery. Kara Swisher wrote a really lovely article about him right away. And we got so many people on board with his story, and so many people sending great wishes and praying for him, and just sending positive energy. And it was a really lovely thing to have all those people on board for that.
This is the guy who wrote the blog. He's got a red hat. He's a friend of mine. He's a reformed patent attorney.
So we, after 16 days in Joplin, we got Brett on that plane that you saw back there, flew him back to, we live in Palo Alto, so flew him back to San Francisco, got to Palo Alto. That was an amazing experience on that jet. The people who are involved with transporting people in these types of situations are phenomenal people. They come into the hospital, they take charge, and then they just run everything and tell you where you need to be next. So we got back. Brett spent 8 days at Stanford. And after that, we were able to move to a rehab hospital. And there he is in the rehab hospital. That was the first picture was with our friend Mike, who wrote the blog, wrote a lot of the beginning part of the blog for me. That's our daughter and dog, his first revisit with the dog. So here's Brett taking some of his early steps as he was recovering. He was trached, had a passe-mur valve, started to say a couple words the day before we left Stanford, and then continued on through rehab therapy. This is his first return to home with our daughter. And at that point, I mean, when you saw the other pictures of him, his skull looked pretty round. That was just swelling. So this is after the swelling was going down. And once we were discharged from the rehab hospital, we got home, we had rehab therapy in our house, which was lovely. And this is a picture of Brett with Tom Crummell, who was on the ride with him and works at Stanford.
The chairman of surgery at Stanford.
Yeah.
Good riding companion.
He was a pretty good guy to have there at the time that he had the surgery. So this was, we got the bone flap replaced. We couldn't use the actual bone that they removed from Brett because normally they take those and they store them in people's abdomens, and Brett was too thin to do that. So it was stored at Joplin, and we brought it back with us to Stanford, and Stanford said no. So he had an implant made, which we're not sure if that was done with a 3D printer or not. We asked a lot when we were going through it. Nobody ever really knew the answer. So we put the implant back in. That happened in January 17th. And then we started to have some problems after that. There was a wound that Brett had gotten when they were doing that surgery that popped open. So we had an appointment that day with the neurosurgeon, and she was like, we're gonna have to take the implant out, and we were, of course, very upset, and they ended up taking him into the ER and finding a room, and they surgically cleaned it up, stitched him back up.
This is a former medical school classmate of Daniel Kraft.
That's Odette Harris, our Stanford neurosurgeon. So you can see where that little wound was stitched up, but then we just had some deterioration in the skin on Brett's head, which you can see those two little white holes there. that's actually like looking through to where the implant is. So we had to go back in, and we did indeed have to take that implant out again and do a very long surgery called a free flap surgery, where they took Brett's lat muscle and put it on his head, and then a skin graft on top of that.
One thing I would mention, sort of through this whole process, I was, friends and Facebook friends with Brett, and one of the really amazing things was to see the incredible community come together from, Kara Swisher, who has an amazing platform, but, and Brett started using technologies like his fitness tracker and seeing how everyone stayed encouraged. What were some of the things you sort of learned from that process and the sort of online support?
Actually, Kara got that device for us.
Yeah. The thing that was really interesting is when you have a brain injury and everyone sort of talks to you about the implications of brain injury and how long the rehab process is going to take, and I met 2 other people who had similar kind of accidents I had, and they all said it's like 2 to 3 years to get better. I think it was really good about Facebook, I would say LinkedIn, and the blog was it created a whole social network around what was going on, sharing that, and a lot of people would opt in to want to help. And as they opted in to help, I could actually go look them up on Facebook and look them up on LinkedIn, and how did I know them? And started to have a lot of interesting conversations with people. And some of the conversations would take place through email, and some of the conversations would just take place in the comments sections attached to a posting that was done on Facebook, or comments through LinkedIn. And so I really think that those tools, I think the medical profession is somewhat shy about Facebook and so forth, because I think the medical profession gets too many people coming in with 25 pages of printouts from Google search, and so they kind of go, we don't want to have a lot of unqualified information that patients are dealing with. And so by posting stuff on Facebook, you get a lot of feedback. But also what you're doing is, to me, one of the biggest things I learned from the whole thing is it's family, friends, and all the people you've met through your life. Someone said something like this earlier, is really important. And then the thing is keeping them informed so you can tap into them. I mean, one of the reasons I got back in the medical jet from Joplin, Missouri, was that in the blog post said, Brett's got to get back. And someone said, I know someone who runs a medical jet company. So they put that medical jet company in contact with Diana, and put in contact with a hospital down in Joplin. And that's how I eventually got back. Even though one of the things we learned is you don't want to schedule these things around the insurance company, because the insurance company wants to schedule the whole thing. Because if they schedule it, they think they control the costs better. But this thing got scheduled. We ended up getting amazing nurses on the flight and everything. It was really good. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, with Brett, we had a very bad prognosis in the beginning. And I think that our doc in Joplin just needed to give us the worst case scenario. He actually had a little bit of bleeding in his brainstem. He had diffuse axonal injury, which is, tearing in the axons at many different places in his brain. But after the doctor told us all that, he said, but, for all I know, he could be sitting up giving me the finger tomorrow. Not tomorrow, but next week.
And they trained me to do it, but I couldn't pull it off.
So anyway, we just carried on with the positive attitude and all the positive energy that was coming at us, and pushed on forward. Those 5 months after the free flap surgery were another really hard 5 months, because Brett started to slide downhill a little bit. But by that point, he was well able to use all of his technology, which my son walked into the room in Joplin and put an iPhone in Brett's hand, because he was, our son, I'm sorry, because he was just like, if anything's going to wake him up, it's this.
And people would write back, like, is that really you writing back? And it was you writing back.
Yeah.
Which was, given his initial prognosis, was really shocking, and how quickly that sort of emerged. Right?
Yeah.
So you were recently back visiting Joplin. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah. So it happened October 8th, 2012. And so one of the things I really wanted to do is go back and thank a lot of people who helped me early on. I wanted to thank the doctors. I wanted to thank the nurses that helped out. I wanted to thank people who sort of gave individual contributions. And it was really interesting. one of the really powerful things is the support network that comes around the family. Like my wife and all of her friends that helped her get through all of this stuff, some of which our friends were doctors, and they'd give her advice on stuff, or they'd hook her up with other people who were doctors. Like she ended up having a really good conversation with the guy who treated the guy who was injured at the Giants-Dodgers game in LA.
Brian Stowe.
Brian Stowe, yeah. And so he was very helpful to my wife about the state of medicine around dealing with the brain and how much it's different than the state of medicine in other parts of the body. But I wanted to go thank everyone. So one of my priorities was I wanted to go back to Joplin, Missouri. I wanted to meet the team. So my accident happened on October 8, 2012. So October 8th of this year, we went back to Joplin, and we showed up in the hospital about the time that they were planning my surgery. It was about the same time they were planning my surgery 2 years earlier. And so I got to meet the doctor and thank him. He was great. I got to meet two of the nurses. I learned how transient the medical field is, and that most of the doctors that worked with me were all gone out of Joplin and gone to other hospitals now. And then most of the nurses had moved on to other hospitals too. But I met two of the nurses, and the two of the nurses looked at me and they said, "Brett, it's so good to see you. You can't realize how excited we are about how well you're talking too." They go, "It's been 2 years since your accident, but a lot of the patients we see when they get their heads wrapped and they come back and see us, they're not really as articulate. They have a lot of the broken parts to their speaking and so forth." And they go, "We're really thrilled to see you." So it was always really good to just go back and meet people and say, because they were really thrilled to see, because they don't get a chance to see patients, particularly patients who've been really wrapped really hard like I was. And my prognosis was pretty bad. And the other thing we got to see when we were back in Joplin is they showed us some MRIs from 2 years ago. And they showed me why they almost didn't release me, because I had some swelling. They're worried about if the swelling eventually went down. But when they were thinking about releasing me, if the swelling didn't go down, what would happen on the flight back? And so that was interesting to see some of the stuff and have the doctor talk frankly to me about what he saw 2 years ago.
So one of the things you've been passionate about, as you've made this incredible recovery, is really sharing some of your lessons. In the last few minutes, you'd put some points you wanted to sort of leave us with in terms of just sort of the technology piece and other lessons. So how would you sort of sum up how that whole impacted you personally and your family?
Well, I think it's you never know where help's going to come from. That's why I've done two volunteer patient sessions at Stanford Medical School. Two of my doctors have asked me to help them out, and one was my neurosurgeon, one was a neurologist. And part of it is I told every student in there, join LinkedIn, join Facebook, because what's going to happen is someone in this room is going to be able to help you in 5 or 10 years from now. You never know if they're going to help you or not. And you have a very powerful tools to stay connected and let people know. And so I really found the blog was really extremely valuable. And I get a lot of compliments today from people saying the blog was incredibly powerful. It was incredibly hard on people too, because they'd spend 20 minutes or half hour internalizing the blog posts, and then they'd spend 2 hours on Google researching stuff, and they'd always come back depressed. I had 6 friends that I grew up with came to see me, and they said that they would spend so much time doing research on Google that they definitely thought I wasn't going to make it, because the prognosis was so bad and the type of injury I had was so bad.
This is Brett's sleep. You can all be jealous.
Sleep and his steps. This guy puts everyone else to shame.
Steps.
And this is his post of 2.5 million steps. And how's that for somebody who was in a coma 2 years ago?
Well, you find when you're in the hospital and you can't walk, and when you start walking, they very limit where you can walk. They can only walk on a certain part of the floor. So as soon as I got out of the hospital, all I wanted to do was walk. And that's what I do now. I walk about 29 to 30 miles a week, and I sleep between 9 and 10 hours a night, which is interesting when you sleep, which is a lot. And a lot of people go, "Why do I sleep so much?" Mainly the reason I sleep so much is I had a doctor at the rehab hospital who'd come in to see me in the morning and say, "How'd you sleep last night?" I go, "I slept well." And he goes, "You told me that yesterday. I'm sure I'm not going to believe you tomorrow." And I go, "The only problem I have with sleeping here is the people turn their TVs on too loud, and in the hospitals." And I go, but the next day he gave me a big talking to. He said, "Your head was opened up once. It's going to be opened up once more when they put the piece back in." And he goes, "The best way for the brain to heal itself is getting lots of good sleep. And if your brain's healing, that means your body's healing." So I focused on that, and I really focused on sleep, and I tracked my sleep. Last night I slept 29 point something hours.
29 hours.
Not 20, no, I didn't, no, I slept
I know, I could use some of that sleep.
9, maybe.
9 hours. 9 hours and 32 minutes, I think. My phone battery's dead.
We sometimes joke that Singularity University is sleepless university, so part of this week will be kind of sleepless. So catch up afterwards. It's good for your health.
But I'm actually blown away. I post on Facebook every night how many steps I walked that day. I've been doing this since January, and it's created a huge dialogue amongst people who tell me, Brett, you've really taught me how to help people who've been hurt bad and they're not moving around. They need to get out walking. And I love getting out walking because I did two things. It was just getting the physical exercise was good, but also was moving the head around and the neck around and all stuff. And I also broke my clavicle. It was really pointed up really big. I really broke it bad. And so just getting out and moving around was really valuable. And
The other thing Brett really loves is socialization, which is a huge part of brain recovery, actually. People who experience TBIs really need to be around people and to connect. And Brett has always been the king of that, and he continued.
My doctor from
This is our Joplin trip. Yeah.
And nurses.
So closing thoughts, things you learned that you want to impart before we...
So family, friends are really critical. And my doctor in Joplin said he was really blown away when after they did my operation, within the next day, there was 5 people from California in Joplin, Missouri hospital. He goes, that was a really showing of support that I had. Then he read the first blog post. He goes, wow, this is really amazing. These guys are doing this stuff. So that was good. I think the other thing, this is my son thinks this is really important. He's 22. He goes, have a good attitude. Believe in your recovery and surround yourself with positivity. I really had a good attitude the whole thing. And I think having a good attitude and working with all my support that helped me, it made everyone believe. And as they believed, I got a lot more support around me. And it made it easier on my wife and my daughter and my son. And they had a really great groups around them too. They naturally form. It's really interesting. My daughter was a senior in high school. I mean, what a disastrous thing to do to a girl who's a senior in high school applying to colleges. She was a good enough student that she's playing lacrosse at Bowdoin in Maine, so she's doing well. But as a parent, I feel like I really caused some challenges to my family having this major accident during a big part of their lives. Set goals that you can achieve and show progress and provide a sense of moving forward, which is really good. It also gets people positive. Once people saw I was walking 1,000 steps a day from not walking at all, they would send me notes. And I'd get these incredibly personal notes back from people going, Brett, I broke my pelvis snowboarding, and I'm not walking that much at all. And the fact that you're answering questions with a thumbs up, thumbs down 3 months ago, and now you're walking 1,000 steps or 1,100 steps a day, it's really amazing. Stay open to possibilities. When it came to the brain, there was a lot of things they didn't know, and we didn't know. We were being educated along the way, so you have to be open to new things. And sometimes we got some ideas, like we got a blog post from a kid who was a teenager, I think in Texas, who had a big brain damage, and his parents put him on massive doses of fish oil. And so I used to always take fish oil before I went on the ride, but I went off it when I went on the ride. And so when I got back from Joplin didn't want me to go on fish oil because they thought it was too blood thinning or something. I forget what the rationale was.
Yeah, it was a bit of a battle to get you on the fish oil, but we were able to do it, so.
Yeah, we went to Stanford. Stanford was sort of okay with it. Even though when they did operations, they wanted me off of it because of...
Okay. I think we want to, well, of course, we want to see more going into brain research. I know it's a big topic now, and Dr. Jeff Manley, the doc I talked to at SF General, actually said to me, you have to understand brain injury is where cardiology was 50 years ago. So let's get that up to speed. And then a couple things that I would love to see. One of them has to do with the big data ideas. I think if we do research following TBI people and different therapies and rehabs that have helped those people, we might be able to find some really great commonalities that will help people. Also would love to see something developed to support families who are going through a crisis. I feel like we had a lot of great support because of our connections, but I feel like we could do more. And I mean, I would love to volunteer to help other people who are going through this sort of thing, because you feel sort of lost and alone as you're going through, and it's great to have good people to advise you.
So this is a great audience to ask for that sort of help, and many of you I think can help build some of those solutions. So any parting thoughts? And then we'll close.
And we did meet with, I mean, every one of my doctors, I said, how can I help? And that's when I got volunteered to be a volunteer patient for Stanford Medical School. But Odette Harris one time said, I have a patient that's in the emergency care unit whose parents are here. And it's really kind of odd that this kid and his parents were from Charleston, South Carolina, which is where my ride was supposed to end. And she goes, it'd be great if you could meet with their parents, because they have a son who had a similar bike accident to yours, and he's in the emergency care unit, and he's not doing that well, and his parents just need some optimism. And so I had to spend that night in the Stanford hospital. So the next day, the dad called me on my cell phone, and as I'm talking to him, I go, how about if my wife and I walk down and talk to you and your wife, and we'll let you know all the things we've learned during our process. And he responds back to me, he goes, you can walk down here? I go, yeah, I can walk down here. I'm walking really well. He goes, well, come on down. So he was surprised when I walked down there, and we had a great conversation with them, and I was talking well, and their son was not talking and wasn't walking, wasn't moving, and now I've recently...
Now we've sent Anthony a jawbone up.
Yeah. He's now tracking his steps.
In South Carolina.
He sends me his weekly report and sends me videos of him walking, which is good.
So it's that kind of connection, inspiration, leveraging of social support and community that I think has helped Brett now be someone who's helping the next generation of patients and beyond. So with that, I really want to thank Brett and Diana for sharing the story. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.